My name is Delia Reeves. I am 47 years old, and I spent 12 years loving a man who mailed me an engraved invitation to watch him celebrate marrying someone else. He chose a waterfront venue 2 miles from my marina, close enough that he would be able to see the lights from my property. He hand-wrote a line at the bottom of that ivory card. I thought you deserved to see it in person. He sent it through the United States Postal Service with a stamp and everything. What Raymond did not know, what he had never once thought to ask about in 12 years, was that I owned a 52-foot yacht docked 100 yards from my front door, and that I had already called my attorney, and that his signature was on a document he had not read carefully enough. He thought he was inviting me to witness what I had lost. Let me tell you what I brought with me. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from today. And if stories like this speak to you, hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story is even more intense. The Gulf doesn't ease into morning. It just arrives. One moment dark, the next lit up like something holy, the water going from black to silver to that particular shade of blue-green that I've never found a name for in all my 47 years of looking at it. I was standing at my kitchen window at 5:45 on a Tuesday, coffee mug warm in both hands, watching it happen the way I did most mornings. The mug was full. I hadn't sipped it yet. That's the kind of morning it was. Still enough to just stand there and look. At the far end of my marina slip, Second Opinion sat in the water the way she always did. Unhurried, certain of herself, 52 feet of white and navy hull catching the early light like she'd been painted there on purpose. I'd owned her for 3 years. Bought her outright, no financing, no drama. Named her myself. Most mornings I looked at her and felt something I didn't have a precise word for. Not pride, exactly. More like recognition. Like seeing your own face clearly for the first time in a while. I'd built this life in pieces, and I'd built it quietly. The Tidewater Gallery came first, 8 years ago. A converted boathouse on the waterfront that I'd turned into something real. Original marine art, sculpture, 3 regional awards on the wall near the door that I almost didn't hang because I wasn't raised to put my accomplishments where people had to look at them. But Aunt Vera, my mother's younger sister, and the most clear-eyed woman I've ever known, told me to put them up and stop being precious about it. So I did. The gallery ran a 6-figure revenue last year, and I had a wait list for 2 of my featured artists. I say that plainly because it is plain. It is simply what the work added up to. Then the properties, 3 of them, purchased with the inheritance my mother left me and the savings I'd been steady about since my teaching days. I still thought of her every time I signed a closing document. She had a way of pressing the pen into my hand like she was transferring something more than just her signature. I think she was. You know what the funny thing was? Raymond never asked. Not once in 12 years did Raymond Okafor, the man I shared my life with, my table with, my energy with, ask me a specific question about my finances. He assumed he already knew the answer. I'd been a high school art teacher when we met, and somewhere in his mind I stayed there. Modest, practical, not exactly swimming in it. Those were his words, said with a laugh that he meant to be gentle and wasn't. I had just declined to invest in one of his deals, one of the many that stalled before they ever breathed, and he genuinely thought he was letting me off easy by not pressing me for money I couldn't spare. 3 weeks later, I bought my 3rd rental property, in cash. I told no one except Vera and my attorney. I stopped correcting Raymond's assumptions the same way you stop watering a plant you've decided to move. Not out of spite, just because it no longer made sense to keep doing it. He called the gallery my little hobby for 6 years. I smiled and changed the subject. I cooked dinner and asked about his day and encouraged him through every stalled deal and administrative review. And I did it genuinely, because that is who I was with him. Warm, I think. Maybe too willing to disappear into the background of his story. My mother used to bring me coffee before school when I was student teaching, set it on the desk without a word, just the particular smell of it finding me in the dark of 5:30 a.m. Some mornings, I still caught that smell and felt her next to me, close as breath. I missed her more on mornings when I had something to think through. The mail came early that Tuesday. I heard the box close from the kitchen and didn't move for a moment. Then I set my coffee down and went to the door. There was only one piece of mail, an ivory envelope, heavy stock, the kind you order special. My name on the front in handwriting I would have known underwater, in the dark, from 50 feet away. Raymond's handwriting. Careful and deliberate, the way he wrote when he wanted something to look considered. My jaw locked. I brought it inside. I stood at the counter and opened it. The invitation was printed, elegant, formal, the kind a professional does on cardstock with a coordinating liner in the envelope. Raymond Okafor and Tiffany Marsh request the pleasure of your company. And the rest of it, the date, the venue, the waterfront restaurant 2 miles down the coast from where I was standing. An engagement party, 6 weeks away. I read it twice, and then I saw the bottom. Below the printed text, added in Raymond's own hand, not typed, not part of the design, just his pen on the card like an afterthought he'd planned for weeks. I thought you deserved to see it in person. I set the card on the counter. I looked out the window at the water. I looked at Second Opinion sitting in her slip, quiet and permanent and entirely mine. I went completely still. The stillness didn't last long, maybe 4 minutes, long enough to let the reality of it settle the way sediment settles, slowly, completely, until the water is clear and you can see all the way to the bottom. He had mailed it. That was the part I kept coming back to. He hadn't texted, hadn't emailed, hadn't had someone pass along the information through the network of mutual acquaintances who were, at this very moment, probably waiting to see how I'd take the news. He had gone to a stationery shop, or sent Tiffany to one, and he had ordered ivory envelopes with heavy stock liners, and he had written my name on the front in his careful, deliberate hand, and he had pressed a stamp into the corner with his own thumb, and he had dropped it in a mailbox. That's intention. That's a man who thought about what he was doing. And then that line at the bottom. I thought you deserved to see it in person, not typed. His pen. His choice to add it after the rest was already printed, already finished, already decided. Like a signature on a contract he wanted me to know he'd signed willingly. I picked up my phone and called my Aunt Vera, my mother's youngest sister, 68 years old, with a mind like a steel trap and a tongue to match. She answered on the second ring. "You're up early, even for you. I have something to read you." I picked up the card. Raymond Okafor and Tiffany Marsh request the pleasure of your company at a celebration of their engagement. I read the date, the venue, all of it. Then, and at the bottom in his handwriting, I thought you deserved to see it in person. Vera was quiet for exactly 1 second. Then she started talking, and I could hear the particular quality her voice got when she was angry on someone else's behalf, low and building, like a weather system finding its shape. Delia, that man had the nerve to, "I know, Vera," on heavy stock paper with a "I know." She stopped. "You already know." "I already know." A pause. Then, carefully, "Where's the venue?" "Harborview Terrace." She knew it immediately. Of course she did. "That's 2 miles from your marina." "Yes." He picked it on purpose. I didn't answer because we both already knew the answer. 2 miles down the same coastline, close enough that on a clear night I could probably see the lights from my back porch. He had chosen it so the geography itself would deliver the message, so that I would sit at home on the evening of his engagement party knowing exactly where he was, knowing exactly what was happening within plain sight of everything I'd built. He wanted it to be close. He wanted it to feel close. That was the cruelty of it. Not the invitation, not even the handwritten line. The address. I thanked Vera and told her I'd see her for lunch. Then I put the card face down on the counter, finished my coffee in 3 swallows, and drove to work. The Tidewater Gallery smelled the way it always did in the morning. salt air and linseed oil, and something faintly cedar from the reclaimed wood shelving along the east wall. I'd opened the building myself 8 years ago with a contractor, a borrowed folding table, and 11 pieces from a coastal painter in Pensacola who had since become one of the most sought-after artists in my catalog. I unlocked the front door, greeted my assistant when she arrived, and walked through the current exhibition the way I always did before the space opened to visitors. Slowly, looking at everything, making sure the room said what I needed it to say. Let me tell you something about a man who stops seeing you clearly. He doesn't make one big decision to go blind. He makes 1,000 small ones. Every assumption he doesn't examine, every question he doesn't ask, every moment he fills in the answer himself because asking feels unnecessary. Raymond had made those small decisions for 12 years. By the end, his picture of me was so thoroughly constructed from his own imagination that the real thing had become almost irrelevant. He never asked about the gallery's revenue. He never asked about the properties. He assumed that because I drove a sensible car and bought my clothes on sale and didn't talk about money the way people talk about money when they have more than they need, he assumed the silence meant absence. He thought my modesty was a map of my means. I thought about the night 2 years ago when he'd come to me with a deal, a mixed-use development he wanted me to put money into. I declined, calmly, the way I declined most things that didn't make sense to me, and he had laughed. Not meanly, that was the thing. It was an affectionate laugh, the kind you give someone you're fond of but don't quite take seriously. "Right," he'd said. "I keep forgetting you're not exactly swimming in it." I had smiled. I had made him a cup of tea. I had said nothing at all. 3 weeks later, I signed the closing documents on my third rental property. Cash purchase. My attorney witnessed it. Vera brought champagne. Raymond never knew. Vera arrived at the gallery at noon exactly, the way she always did for our standing Tuesday lunch, punctual in the particular way of women who respect other people's time because they respect their own. I had set the invitation on the small table in my back office, face up, next to a sandwich I hadn't touched. She sat down across from me. She looked at the card. She looked at me. "What's the plan?" I looked out the window at the water glittering 200 yards off. Then I picked up my coffee cup, held it a moment, and set it back down. "I'm going to his party." Vera went very still. "On the yacht?" I set the cup down. "On the yacht." The 6 weeks passed the way 6 weeks pass, when you have work to do and a life to tend to. I opened the gallery every morning. I returned calls. I reviewed a lease renewal on the Gulfport property and negotiated the terms down without drama. I had one quiet meeting with my attorney, Lionel Ashby, a longtime family friend who had handled my business matters since the gallery opened, and had known my mother well before that, in his corner office on a Thursday afternoon, where we talked for 40 minutes and I told him what I needed him to understand. He opened a legal pad, wrote 4 things on it, and said he'd be ready when I was. Then I went back to my life. I did not call Raymond. I did not ask around about the party. I gave him nothing to read. You know what the most useful thing a woman can do when someone is waiting for her to fall apart? Absolutely nothing. Just go to work. Just be fine. 6 weeks later, Saturday, early evening. The Gulf goes gold about an hour before the sun actually sets. It doesn't happen slowly, it's more like a switch. One moment the water is ordinary blue, and then the light shifts and the whole surface turns the color of something expensive, and everything on the coast catches it differently depending on what it's made of. Glass catches it sharp, water catches it soft, white hull catches it like a held breath. I was on deck when we rounded the bend. I dressed simply, black dress, nothing fussy, the kind of thing I could move in. My sunglasses were on, the wide ones that my mother always said made me look like I was in a French film. My crew handled the navigation. I had one job. Harborview Terrace came into view on my left, the restaurant's waterfront deck lit with rows of warm fairy lights, the kind of light that makes everything look like a promise. I could see the guests from 200 yards out, 60-odd people in summer clothes, standing in clusters, champagne in hand, the low thrum of a live string duo carrying across the water. Raymond had done this beautifully. I had to give him that. I watched the terrace the way I watch a room I'm about to enter. Quietly, cataloging. Tiffany in blush, which suited her. Raymond in a cream blazer, working the party the way he always worked a room, hand extended before he was fully in range, laugh a half-second early, like punctuation he put in before he'd heard the joke. Second opinion moved at a steady, unhurried pace. 52 feet of white and navy hull, cutting the gulf with the kind of quiet authority that doesn't need to announce itself. The engines were not loud. They didn't need to be. The terrace went silent. Not gradually, suddenly. The way a room silences when something happens that rearranges everyone's understanding of where to look. I saw it happen in sequence. The guests closest to the waterline first, then the ones behind them turning to follow the shifted attention, then the string duo trailing off mid-phrase because even musicians feel a change in pressure. I took off my sunglasses. I did not rush. I moved to the bow rail and stood where I could be seen clearly, the way you stand when you're not hiding anything and never were. The anchor went down within full sightline of the terrace. I stepped off onto the dock with the ease of a woman who had done this regularly for 3 years. Because I had. I walked toward the party. I was holding the invitation, the original ivory stock, his handwriting on the front. I carried it the way you carry documentation, not as a prop, as a fact. Raymond saw me when I was still 20 yards out. I watched the color leave his face. Not dramatically. It didn't drain so much as it simply departed, quietly, the way heat leaves a room when a window opens in winter. His eyes went from me to the yacht, still visible behind me, then back to me, then to the yacht again. The calculation was happening in real time and I could see it working. The recalibration, the rapid reassembly of a picture of me he had built over 12 years that was now, visibly, structurally wrong. Tiffany gripped his arm. She didn't know why yet. She just felt the change in him and responded to it, the way you grab a railing when something shifts beneath your feet. I stopped in front of Raymond. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I looked at him directly, not with heat, not with triumph, just with the clear, level attention of a woman who had decided what she was going to say and was now saying it. "You said you thought I deserved to see it in person." I held his eyes. I thought the same. I took a glass of champagne from the tray of a passing server. I raised it, not to the party, not to anyone else, just a small, private gesture that meant what it meant. Then I turned, found an empty chair near the edge of the terrace, and sat down. Raymond had not recovered a single word. I found a chair near the terrace railing and sat in it like I'd been there all evening. Around me, the party tried to remember what it was doing. The string duo started up again, something light, a bossa nova thing that nobody was listening to. The server with the champagne tray made another loop. Conversations resumed, the way conversations do when people decide that whatever they just saw is better processed quietly, between themselves, at a safe remove from the subject. Raymond recovered his posture before he recovered his expression. He turned back to his guests and said something that produced polite laughter. I watched him do it and felt nothing in particular. He was good at surfaces. I'd always known that. What I hadn't always known was how little was underneath them. A woman I recognized, the wife of one of Raymond's former business partners, materialized beside me with the particular energy of someone who had appointed herself to make sense of the situation. She said it was so lovely that I could be here, that it showed real class, that she'd always admired how graceful I was. "Thank you," I said. "The shrimp are excellent." She blinked and moved on. That was the template for the next hour. People approached with careful words arranged around the real question. What are you doing here, and how are you not in pieces right now? And I responded to the surface of what they said without touching anything underneath it. I was gracious. I was warm. I was completely unreachable. Let me tell you something about a woman who has spent 12 years learning to make everyone around her comfortable. She knows exactly how to give people just enough to satisfy them without giving them anything at all. Tiffany came to me around the 40-minute mark. I saw her coming from across the terrace, that particular purposeful walk of someone who has talked themselves into something. She was prettier up close than she photographed. Early 30s, clear skin, the kind of careful beauty that required real effort but was meant to look effortless. She stopped beside my chair and smiled, and the smile was genuine enough that I respected the attempt. "I am really glad you came," she said. "Honestly, it takes guts. I think it says a lot about you, the kind of woman you are." She was probing. Brave means broken. Guts means desperate. She wanted me to confirm the version of me she'd been carrying around, the grieving woman who had still shown up, whose presence here was proof of how badly she'd lost. I smiled back at her, easy and unhurried. "The venue is beautiful," I said. "Did you choose it yourself?" A beat. She hadn't expected that. Yes. Raymond wanted the harbor view specifically, but the decor was mostly me." "You have a good eye," I said, and meant it. That was all. No edge in my voice, no coded weight in the compliment. I gave her exactly what I said and nothing more. She stood there for a moment, looking for the subtext she was certain had to be there, and found none. The smile on her face became uncertain. She thanked me, said she should get back to Raymond, and left. She was rattled. I could see it in the way she moved, just slightly less steady than she'd arrived. She had expected grief, or bitterness, or the barely contained performance of a woman holding herself together in public. She didn't know what to do with ordinary. Walt found me about 20 minutes later. Raymond's colleague Walt was the kind of man who had always been kind to me in the low-key, habitual way of someone who felt guilty without being entirely sure what for. Mid-50s, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, slightly too much bourbon in his hand for this early in the evening. He sat down in the chair beside me, uninvited, and leaned in with the body language of a man who had been carrying something and had decided tonight was when he was going to put it down. "Delia." He kept his voice below the music. "I've been going back and forth about saying this." I turned to look at him and waited. "It wasn't recent," he said. "Between Raymond and... I don't know what he told you, but it wasn't just the last few months. They've been together over 2 years. More than that, maybe." He looked at his glass. "The whole last stretch of you two. I thought you should know that from someone." I had suspected. I want to be honest about that. There is a particular quality to the last chapter of a relationship where someone has already decided to leave. A certain absence underneath the presence. A going through motions that feels like a slow leak you can't locate. I had felt it, and filed it, and never quite said its name out loud. Now I had the name. My hands went still in my lap. "Thank you, Walt," I said, quietly. Clearly, like I meant it. He looked at me for a moment with an expression I recognized, the slight unease of someone who expected tears and received composure instead. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said. He nodded, not quite convinced, and excused himself. I finished the last of my champagne, set the glass on the railing with a small, final click. Then I stood, smoothed my dress, and walked back down the dock without saying goodbye to anyone. Second opinion received me the way it always did, solid, steady, already pointed toward open water. I didn't look back until we were moving. When I did, Raymond was standing at the terrace railing, watching. His expression was not relief that I was leaving. It was not anger. It was not even grief. It was dread. The early, quiet kind. The kind a man gets when he understands for the first time that he has miscalculated something he cannot go back and fix. I turned back to the water and let him watch me go. The next morning I was in Lionel's office by 9, not because I was anxious, because I'd scheduled it for 9, and I keep my appointments. Lionel Ashby, my attorney, and the man who had handled my family's legal matters since before I opened the gallery, had an office on the third floor of a building overlooking the bay. He'd known my mother. He drafted the original sale documents when I bought the Tidewater property. He was the kind of lawyer who spoke in complete sentences and never once made me feel like I was paying for the silence between them. He had coffee waiting. He always had coffee waiting.
"How'd it go?" he asked, setting a folder on the desk between us.
"As expected," I said. He accepted that without pushing, the way professionals do when they understand that the social event was not actually the point. He settled into his chair, opened the folder, and began. "You know what most people don't know about the agreements they sign? They don't read them. Not really. They skim the first paragraph, flip to the signature page, and tell themselves that the whole thing is probably standard. Probably nothing. Probably something the other party's people put together as a formality, not a weapon." Raymond had done exactly that. 12 years ago, when we first moved in together, my mother, a woman who had built her own modest security on careful documents and deliberate choices, had sat across from me at my kitchen table and said, "Delia, you love this man. I understand that. But you are not required to love him without any paperwork." I can still smell the chicory coffee she always made too strong. She pressed her palm flat on the table when she said it, the way she did when she was done negotiating with herself about something. She had insisted on a cohabitation and financial protection agreement. She had called Lionel herself and explained what she wanted in it. I had presented it to Raymond, who had read approximately the first 2 paragraphs before signing with the easy confidence of a man who assumed there was nothing in it worth his full attention. He was not wrong that I wasn't wealthy at the time. He was only wrong about what I was going to become. Lionel walked me through it methodically. The agreement covered any business ventures I developed during the period of our relationship, in which Raymond received my financial support. It covered intellectual property derived from my professional work, and it contained a specific clause, one my mother had insisted upon with particular firmness, addressing any period in which Raymond used my personal financial standing, my credit, or my home address in connection with his own professional or business activity. Lionel slid a document across the desk. "He used your home address as his primary business address for 18 months, while his broker's license was under administrative review," he said. "That review ran from month 14 to month 32 of your relationship." My jaw locked for just a second. "He couldn't use his own address?" "Not during an active review. Not if he wanted to keep operating." Lionel's tone was neutral in the way of someone who has long since moved past being surprised by other people's decisions. "He also used your personal credit twice to secure bridge financing for deals. You signed at the time. I have those documents. But under the terms of the agreement, those transactions created a financial entanglement that carries enforceable obligations." I looked at the numbers on the page in front of me. Specific, clean, documented across 12 years with a kind of paper trail that doesn't disappear just because the relationship did. I thought about Raymond at that kitchen table, laughing at his own joke about me not being exactly swimming in it, signing with a pen he'd probably borrowed. What did he think he was signing? A formality, a courtesy to a woman he'd decided wasn't worth reading carefully for. "The total obligation," Lionel said, "when you account for the address use, the credit leverage, and the accrued interest under the agreement's own terms, is significant." He named the figure. Precise, no hedging. My hands stayed still on the arms of the chair. "And the timing," I said. Lionel nodded once. "He's recently announced an engagement. He will almost certainly be seeking to purchase a home, open joint accounts, establish combined credit. When a man in Raymond's position starts that process, what he carries into it matters very much." He paused. "The timing is, let's say, consequential." That was the word he chose, consequential. I sat with that for a moment. Outside, a boat moved across the bay. The light off the water was the same light I watched every morning from my kitchen window, and I thought about my mother pressing her hand flat on the table, and about 12 years of silence I had kept without knowing exactly when it would become useful. Now I knew. I looked at Lionel and told him exactly what I wanted done, not the broad shape of it, the specifics, the sequence, the timeline, every step in the order I wanted it executed. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded once, reached into his desk drawer, and opened a fresh file folder. 2 days after my meeting with Lionel, I called Tiffany Marsh. I didn't ask Vera for her number. I didn't dig for it. Raymond had been on my phone plan for 3 of our 12 years, and Tiffany had called the house line twice during what I now understood was their 2nd year together. I'd seen the number. I kept things like that the way my mother kept receipts. Not because I expected to need them, but because throwing things away before you understand their value is a habit I never developed. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "This is Delia Reeves," I said. "I'd like 20 minutes of your time. In person." There was a pause, not long, maybe 4 seconds, and I could feel her weighing it. She was curious. More than that, she was unsettled, and the unsettled part of her wanted an answer for what she'd seen at that party. She thought 20 minutes might give it to her. "When?" she said. We agreed on Thursday morning, a coffee shop midway between her part of town and mine. Neutral ground, public, appropriately unremarkable. I told her I'd be there at 10. I arrived at 9:50 and chose a corner table with a clear view of the door. I ordered a latte I didn't particularly want and waited. She came in 3 minutes early, which surprised me. I'd expected her to be late, either from nerves or from the particular power move of making someone wait. But she walked in precisely, spotted me without hesitation, and crossed the room without breaking stride. Whatever else Tiffany Marsh was, she wasn't a coward. "I'll give her that much." She sat down. She did not smile. Neither did I. We were both too old for the performance of pleasantry in a situation like this one. Let me tell you something. There is a specific kind of restraint required when you sit across from the woman who spent 2 years in your life's blind spot. The temptation isn't to scream. It's quieter than that. It's the urge to make her understand the full weight of what she participated in, to lay it all out and watch it land. I didn't do that. I had not come to this coffee shop for my own feelings. I had come for a reason. "I appreciate you meeting me," I said. She nodded once, her hands wrapped around a coffee she'd brought from the counter on her way to the table. She was watching me the way people watch something they can't yet classify. "I'm going to tell you 3 things," I said. "After that, what you do is your business." She didn't object to the structure. She just waited. "First, I know your relationship with Raymond started more than 2 years ago. I know the overlap with mine was not a few weeks. I'm not here to discuss that. What happened, happened. I'm not sitting here to make you feel something about it." Her chin lifted slightly. She'd been braced for accusation. When it didn't come, she didn't know where to put her hands. Second, I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table between us. I didn't push it toward her, just set it down so it was clearly available. "This is documentation of Raymond's financial conduct over the past several years. There are records of 2 bridge loans he secured using another party's personal credit. There are records of his broker's license undergoing administrative review and the address he used during that period to keep operating. And there are 3 client transactions in which his reported commission figures don't align with what those clients were told they'd be charged." Tiffany's eyes went to the folder. She didn't open it yet. "That last category," I said, "is ethically questionable at minimum. At maximum, it is something an attorney or a licensing board might find interesting." She looked up at me. "Third, Lionel Ashby's office, my attorney, will be contacting Raymond within the week regarding a formal financial agreement. I'm telling you this as a courtesy, not as a threat." I kept my voice even. "You are about to make a significant legal and financial commitment to this man. I believe you deserve accurate information before you do." The coffee shop was busy enough around us that no one was paying attention. Somewhere behind me, someone was explaining their complicated order in patient, exhausting detail. Tiffany sat with everything I'd just given her, and I watched her work through it. Not the folder specifically, but the shape of what I was describing, the accumulated picture. Her eyes came back to mine. There was something careful in them now, calculated. "Did he know?" she asked. "About the money, the gallery, and everything?" "No," I said. One word. That was all it needed. She looked down at her coffee. Something moved across her face. Not quite recognition, not quite grief. It was the expression of a woman who had made a careful investment and was now reviewing the prospectus she hadn't read closely enough the first time. She was doing math, and from where I sat, she did not like the answer she was reaching. I picked up my bag. I settled the strap onto my shoulder. "Thank you for your time," I said, and I walked out without looking back. I went back to my life. That is the part people always find hard to believe when I tell this story. They expect that I was pacing or losing sleep or checking my phone every 20 minutes waiting for something to break open. But I wasn't. I had done what needed doing. Lionel was moving. The documentation was prepared. There was nothing left for me to manage except the actual living of my days, and I had always been good at that. Monday morning, I opened the Tidewater Gallery at 9, same as always. Tuesday, I drove out to the Pelican Street rental and walked the property with my handyman because the gutters on the south side needed attention before the fall rains came. Wednesday, I sat at my desk in the back office and reviewed a portfolio that had arrived from a young painter out of Savannah. Coastal work, raw and specific, the kind of talent that doesn't know yet what it has. I made notes in the margin the way my mother used to mark up the books she loved. Underlines and small stars. Her handwriting and mine are almost identical, which still catches me off guard sometimes. Lionel's office was finalizing the settlement language. He'd called Tuesday afternoon to confirm the timeline. Everything was on track. Raymond would receive the letter Monday morning. I did not think about Raymond very much. That is not braveness. It is just the truth. I had spent 12 years thinking about Raymond, thinking about his deals, his moods, his version of our future. I was done with that particular expenditure. You know what fills the space when you stop spending energy on someone who is never investing back? Everything else. Just everything else. He called on a Thursday, 2 days after Tiffany and I sat across from each other in that coffee shop. I was in the gallery when my phone went off. I saw his name on the screen and stepped into my office and closed the door. Delia. He was controlled. I could hear him working at it, keeping his voice measured the way men do when they've rehearsed the first 30 seconds of a conversation and are hoping the rest will follow naturally. "I think we need to talk about what you're doing." I sat down. I didn't say anything. "I want you to hear me out, because I think you are making a serious mistake here. What Lionel's office is preparing, and yes, I know about it. I have my own attorney. It is not going to hold up the way you think it will. The agreement your mother pushed for was 12 years ago, Delia. 12 years. I used your address for a year and a half during a filing issue. That's not some kind of conspiracy. That's two people in a long-term relationship sharing resources. The credit situation was documented. You signed. You knew. And now you want to turn all of that into some legal ambush right when I'm trying to start a new chapter of my life, and I need you to hear yourself. This is vindictive. This is beneath you, honestly. You came to my engagement party on that boat like you were making some kind of statement, and now you're sending attorneys after me, and I don't know what you think you're proving, but you are embarrassing yourself. You are embarrassing yourself, and you don't even see it." He stopped, drew a breath. "I gave 12 years to this relationship, too. I deserve a little grace here." I let the last of it settle. Then I said, "Raymond, you sent me an invitation to your engagement party because you wanted to hurt me. I want you to consider whether you have fully thought through what it means that I came." Silence. I hung up. He did not call back. I did not call forward. I set the phone face down on my desk and went back to the Savannah painter's portfolio and drew a small star next to a piece called low tide, February. It was exactly right. I made a note to contact her the following week. Friday evening, my Aunt Vera, my mother's younger sister, the woman who had helped me build my investment portfolio one careful conversation at a time, came for dinner. I made shrimp and grits from scratch, which takes longer than it should and is worth every minute. We ate on the back porch with the water going dark and soft in the distance, the marina lights just starting to show. The air had that particular early fall edge to it, cool enough to notice, warm enough to stay. We talked about Vera's garden, which had produced an unreasonable number of tomatoes this season and was now her primary personality. We talked about the Savannah painter. Vera agreed immediately, which is the only endorsement I need. We talked about the novel we'd both been reading, which had a third act we disagreed about in the specific, pleasurable way of two people who read carefully. We did not talk about Raymond. Not once. Not his name, not his situation, not the letter scheduled to arrive at his door in 3 days. He did not occupy a single minute of that porch, that dinner, or that evening. And that, more than anything else I had done in the past 3 weeks, felt like something I had earned. Before she left, Vera stopped in my doorway and turned back to me. She took my face in both her hands, the way she has done since I was small, the way my mother used to do, and looked at me for a moment without speaking. "Your mama would be so pleased," she said. I nodded. I already knew. Lionel's letter to Raymond was scheduled to arrive Monday morning. Monday morning, Lionel's letter landed. I know this because Lionel texted me at 10:43 to confirm delivery. Certified mail, signature required. Raymond had signed for it himself. I put my phone in my desk drawer and went back to work. By Wednesday afternoon, Raymond had retained an attorney. I know this because his attorney called Lionel, and Lionel called me at 4:15 with the particular tone he uses when things are going exactly as anticipated. "He wants to meet privately," Lionel said. "No attorneys present, just the two of you." "Where does he want to meet?" "He didn't specify." "Then I will." I told Lionel my terms. He was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the small approval in that silence. "I'll relay the conditions," he said. Raymond called me directly that evening. Not his attorney, not a message. Raymond, on my cell phone, the same number he'd had for 12 years. "Delia." His voice was different from the Thursday call. The rehearsed control was gone. What was underneath it wasn't contrition exactly. It was something closer to a man who had just read a document very carefully for the first time and understood, finally, what his signature meant. "I'd like to sit down with you. Just us. No, I just want to talk." "The Tidewater Gallery," I said. "Thursday, 7 o'clock, after closing." A pause. "Okay." "I'll have water on the table. Come alone." Thursday evening, just after 7. He arrived 3 minutes late. I heard the knock, unlocked the front door, and stepped back to let him in. I didn't greet him with anything he could use. I just turned and walked to the table I'd set up in the center of the main gallery floor. 2 chairs facing each other, a folder in front of my seat, 2 glasses of water. He looked around before he sat down. I watched him do it. I'd seen Raymond walk into rooms his whole adult life, and I knew how he read them. Appraising, calibrating, measuring what a space said about the person who owned it. He looked at the exhibition on the walls. He looked at the awards mounted near the entrance, 3 of them, framed in dark wood. He looked at the lighting, the square footage, the quality of the installations. His jaw shifted. Just once. He sat down. He tried contrition first. He told me he hadn't handled things well, that he should have been more honest with me about where he was emotionally, that he regretted how things ended, that whatever had happened between us, I deserved better than finding out the way I did. He said this with his hands flat on the table and his eyes on my face, and it was delivered well, I'll grant him that. Raymond always could calibrate a room. My hands stayed still. "The agreement, Raymond," I said. That shifted him into accusation. He told me the whole thing was a setup, that my mother had never liked him, that the agreement was designed to trap him, that I had known for years exactly what was in that document and had been waiting for the right moment to use it against him. He said the word ambush twice. He said I had been building this quietly while pretending to be someone he could trust. And what kind of person does that, Delia? What kind of person keeps all of this? I opened the folder. I slid the agreement across the table. Your signature is on page 4, I said. He looked at it. He didn't pick it up. He already knew what it said. You know what desperation looks like on a man who thought he was charming his way out of something? It looks like minimization. He tried that next. The address usage was standard practice for a shared household. The credit situations were mutual decisions made in good faith with full documentation. We were together. That's what people do when they're together. He was being held accountable for things that were simply the normal texture of a long relationship, and the fact that I was choosing to weaponize them now said more about my bitterness than it did about any actual wrongdoing on his part. My jaw locked, just for a moment. You told me, I said, that I wasn't exciting enough for the life you wanted. You said that in my kitchen, and then you let me make you dinner. I held his eyes. I cooked for you for 12 years, Raymond. I think I have been easy enough on you for long enough. The sentence landed like a door closing. He looked around the gallery again. I could see it happening. The full recalculation, arriving late and landing hard. The awards, the exhibition. The evidence of 8 years of a thriving, real, legitimate business that he had called a hobby while eating the meals I made in the house I owned. His expression didn't collapse. It just emptied. The performance fell out of it. That recalculation was 12 years too late. I had no use for it now. I told him Lionel's terms, plainly and completely. The settlement amount, the removal of my name from his broker's license filings, the timeline for execution, no litigation, no public record. A clean, documented resolution, extended to him not as mercy, but as efficiency. He picked up the pen. He signed where Lionel had marked the pages. He stood, pushed the chair back with a careful, controlled movement, and walked to the door without looking at me. I heard it close behind him. I stood alone in my gallery. The exhibition was lit beautifully. It always is. I stood there long enough to feel the room settle back into itself, to feel it become simply mine again, without his presence reshaping the air. Then I turned off the lights. Section by section, moving through the gallery the way I do every night, until the only light left was the one above the door. I locked up. I went home. The following Thursday, mid-morning, I was at my desk in the back office of the gallery, working through a new submission from a sculptor out of Pensacola. Mixed media, driftwood, and cast bronze. Genuinely interesting. When my phone buzzed against the desk. Vera. I picked up on the second ring. You sitting down? She said. I'm always sitting down when I'm at my desk, Vera. Smart mouth. But I could hear the particular quality underneath her voice. Not urgency. Something more like the careful delivery of a woman who has been holding a piece of information and waiting for the right moment to set it down. I heard something this morning, after service, from Louise's daughter. You remember her, the one who does hair over on Magnolia? I remember her. Tiffany called off the engagement. I set down the photograph of the sculptor's work I'd been holding. My hands went still. When? Sometime this past weekend, from what Louise said. No announcement, no post, nothing public. She just returned the ring and moved out of the apartment. Vera paused. Raymond's apartment, I mean. She was already living there, apparently. I hadn't known that. I filed it away without comment. What reason did she give? I asked. To Raymond? That she needed time to think. Vera's voice carried the particular dryness of a woman who has heard that phrase deployed in every direction for 6 decades. But what she told her own sister, and you know how that travels, was something else entirely. Said she didn't want to marry a man who had spent 2 years lying to another woman while planning his exit. Said she understood what that meant about who he'd be when the next woman came along. I didn't say anything for a moment. You know what I felt? Not satisfaction, not relief exactly either. Something quieter than either of those. Tiffany Marsh had made choices that cost me something real. 2 years of my life lived inside a lie I didn't know I was living. 2 years of meals and conversations and ordinary Sundays that had a different truth underneath them than the one I understood. She had looked at that situation and chosen Raymond anyway, and I had not forgotten it, and was not going to pretend I had. But she had also sat across from me in that coffee shop, looked at the folder I put in front of her, and done the math honestly. And then she had acted on it. That isn't rehabilitation. It's just the truth, accurate and without embellishment. I remembered, suddenly, the feeling of a Sunday morning about 9 years ago. Raymond still asleep, me at the kitchen table with my mother's old tin box of financial papers spread in front of me, working through the early numbers for what would become the Tidewater Gallery. My mother had sent me that box 8 months before she died, with a note tucked inside that said, "Build something they can't take." I hadn't fully understood what she meant then. I understood it completely now. "Delia?" Vera said. "I'm here." "You all right?" "I'm fine, Vera. I mean it." And I did mean it. She made her choice. At the end, she made a different one. That's all it is. Vera was quiet for a beat. "You're a more measured woman than I am." "You've told me that before." "I'll probably tell you again." I almost smiled. Was there anything else? There was, as it turned out. Vera had heard, from a different thread of the same community network, this one running through a man at our church who worked in commercial real estate, that Raymond had quietly withdrawn his application for a senior broker position at a firm across the bay, a firm he had mentioned to mutual acquaintances more than once over the past year, the kind of casual, repeated mention that meant he had been counting on it. Whether the firm had learned something, or whether Raymond had simply lost the steadiness that kind of opportunity required, I couldn't say. I didn't know. I didn't go looking. Let me tell you something about information you don't reach for. Sometimes it's more useful than the kind you chase down, because it arrives already sorted, already telling you exactly as much as you need to know, and nothing that would pull you back into a story you've already finished. Raymond was contracted and retreating. The settlement was signed. My name was no longer attached to a single document in his professional life. Whatever shape his life was taking now, it was taking it without any architecture I had built. That was enough. That was exactly enough. I thanked Vera, told her I'd see her Sunday, and put the phone down on the desk. The Pensacola sculptor's portfolio was still open in front of me. 6 photographs and a single-page artist statement written in clear, unpretentious language about what water does to wood over time. I read it twice. The work was strong. The voice was honest. The kind of artist who knew what they were making and why. I pulled the portfolio to the center of the desk and reached for my pen. 8 months later. The Arts District location was bigger than I needed, and exactly the right size. That's the only way I know how to say it. 200 people moved through the space on opening night, and the sound of it, conversation layered over music, heels on hard wood, the particular acoustic warmth of a room full of people who are genuinely glad to be somewhere, settled around me like something I'd earned. Which I had. The walls held work I'd spent 4 months selecting, 12 artists, 3 mediums, 1 organizing idea about coastline and what it does to the people who live beside it. It was the best exhibition I had ever put together. I knew that clearly and without apology. Aunt Vera, my mother's youngest sister, and the woman who had sat across from me at more kitchen tables than I could count, arrived in a yellow dress that made the whole room look like it had been planning for her. She came through the door, looked at the space, looked at me, and pressed her lips together in a way that meant she was not going to cry and was very committed to that position. "Your mother," she said, and then stopped. That was all she needed to say. My attorney, Lionel, who had been part of my family's life since before I opened the gallery's first location, gave a toast that ran exactly 4 minutes. I had asked him for 5, which meant he had actually listened, and landed 2 jokes that were genuinely funny rather than attorney at a podium funny, which is a different and considerably less amusing category. People laughed. I laughed. He raised his glass in my direction and said, "To a woman who plans ahead," and left it at that, which was perfect, because that was everything. I stood near the center of the main room sometime around 9 o'clock, when the evening had found its rhythm and I could stop managing it and simply be in it. I held a glass of sparkling water and looked at the walls I had filled, the artists I had chosen, the space I had built for work that deserved a serious room. There is a feeling I don't have a clean word for. Spacious, maybe, the closest I have come. Like a room you've been living in for years, a room that felt normal and adequate and fine, until the day you finally walk out of it and turn around and understand all at once that you had been making yourself smaller than you were in order to fit. And now you are not doing that. And the room you are standing in now was built to your actual size. That's what that night felt like. That's the only way I can tell it honestly. 1 week later, Tuesday morning. The Gulf light at that hour does something I have never figured out how to fully describe. It isn't soft exactly. It's patient. It comes across the water at an angle that makes everything it touches look like it has been here a long time and intends to stay. I was on the deck of Second Opinion with my coffee, watching it do what it does. No plans for the boat that morning. No destination. I had come aboard early just to sit, which is a thing I do now without needing a reason. The yacht had been a weapon once, an answer, a sentence I delivered at 30 knots with a black dress and my chin level. I didn't regret any of that, but that morning it was just a boat that belonged to me, the same way the gallery belonged to me, and the properties belonged to me, and the Tuesday morning, and the coffee, and the light on the water all belonged to me. Simply, fully, without performance or explanation. I finished the cup and went home. The following Sunday. I was still in my church clothes, good dress, bare feet, when I sat down at the kitchen table with a portfolio that had arrived Friday and that I had made myself wait until after service to open. I have a rule about work on Sundays, and I break it regularly, but I try to at least make it to noon. The portfolio was from a painter out of Mobile. Oils. Large format coastal work that did something with fog and negative space I had never seen handled quite that way. The artist's statement was 2 paragraphs, clean and exact, written by someone who understood what they were doing and had no interest in explaining it to death. I read it twice. I looked at the images 3 times. I picked up the phone and called Vera. "You need to hear about this painter," I said when she picked up. "Good morning to you too. Are you eating?" "I had eggs after church." "That's not what I asked." "Vera, I'm calling to tell you about a painter." "Tell me about the painter." So I did, and somewhere in the middle of it, describing the way this woman handled the horizon line, the way she let the fog do actual work rather than just atmosphere, I started laughing. Not at anything specific, just at the feeling of it. The Sunday kitchen and the sweet tea sweating on my mother's coaster, and Vera on the other end of the line saying, in the particular way she did when she was genuinely interested. My life fit. That's what I was laughing at. That simple, that complete. Sometime after the settlement closed, Lionel mentioned in passing that Raymond had relocated to a city 3 hours north, working for a smaller brokerage, a quieter market, a different chapter. He said it the way you mention weather, factual, unremarkable, already moving on. I received it the same way. Raymond Okafor was a man who had made a calculation and been wrong about almost every variable in it. I did not wish him ill. I did not wish him well. I did not, if I am being precise about it, wish him anything at all. He had stopped being a variable in my life, and I had stopped being a woman who kept track of him. And that was the full extent of what I had to say about it. He thought he was inviting me to witness what I'd lost. I thought I was arriving to show him who I was. We were both right. The difference was that I already knew the answer. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I've got 2 stories on the screen that you have to watch next. Have a great day!